Hello everyone, welcome to today's third session on brain stimulation. Before we start the session, there are a few housekeeping announcements which I would like to make. Like when you're joining the sessions, please join with your names. Please mute your mics when you join. Before joining itself, there are options as to whether you want to join with audio and join with video. Please tick in that so that you do not join with audio or you do not join with video if the backgrounds are not appropriate. And we have sent out some photos for you to know how to log in and hear the video. Kindly note that by clicking the mic button, you will not be able to hear us. We know that many people are facing difficulty in actually hearing us. That's why people unmute their mics. By unmuting your mic is to only talk to us. So instead of you listening to us, we'll be able to listen to you, and that will cause a lot of disturbance in the video. This is one of the feedbacks we have got, that people log in and they switch on their audio, and it is people find it difficult to continue to hear the sessions. So please do not unmute your mic in between the session. Also, please be mindful of your background when you switch on your video. If you carry your mobile and move around, then there will be a lot of disturbances. If you're sitting in one place, then switch on the video. Otherwise, switch off the video. When you join, there are two options: don't connect to audio, turn off my video. Click both of them, and then when you join, in the left corner, there is a speaker button. So if you click on the speaker button, you will get two options: either dial in or call via device audio. So click on call via device audio, then you will be able to hear to the lecture. We welcome Dr. Preeti Sinha, who is additional professor of psychiatry in Department of Psychiatry at NIMHANS. So she'll be taking today's session. She has vast experience in ECT and ECT related procedures. Welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and I am thankful to the telemedicine unit who has started this Indians to help the postgraduates and practicing psychiatrists, and they felt that ECT is an important thing which they should know, and then I got the chance to speak to you about a very important aspect, which is the only remaining aspect as far as ECT is concerned. That is where to give ECT. You have learned about ECT, now to see that which indications would be helpful where when you give ECT, and to know something about the mechanisms of action. You already would have, I assume that you would have known about the other two presentations which was given by Professor Jagdisha and Dr. Sachin about how to handle special populations and the basics of ECT procedure and related adverse effects. So because then it would be easier for you to understand about this presentation. So the outline would be, first we'll talk about evidence-based indications, where we'll go disorders-wise. Most probably we all know that depression is the one where ECT is given more. So we'll have depression, schizophrenia, manic episode, and other disorders where it has been used in dementia and Parkinson's as well. Then we'll see that how indications are there for different kinds of electrode placement, different electrical aspects, including pulse width, pulse frequency, and amplitude. And when we have covered this, then we'll move to the mechanisms of action, where the neuroplasticity is the major theory and hypothesis behind the action of ECT, followed by EEG or electric encephalography. Then something about neurotransmitters, and in very short about the others aspects which the ECT might be affecting. These all may be more related to depression than going specifically to the psychosis. And then some information about how does ECT cause cognitive deficits. So let's begin there. So in depression, everyone knows that ECT is helpful. There are many RCTs which have been done which shows that it is better than a sham ECT or simulated ECT. It's also better than medications also. And still it is used many a times as a last resort, though recently the meta-analysis have shown that if two antidepressants have failed, ECT is much more cost effective than using another trial of antidepressants. As far as symptoms are concerned, it works towards the core mood and anhedonia symptoms more than the headache or body ache or not able to sleep, those kinds of biological functions. And if nothing is working, only ECT works, then there are trials, especially in recent last 2-3 years, about the maintenance ECT, and which have been shown to prevent the relapse. Evidence are there up to 1 year, but it may work later also. But why then we keep it as a last resort? So there is a need of a good setup to be able to give modified ECT, need of anesthesia. You should have a medical backup about the facilities if required, the cost of the treatment, and the most important or one of the important stuff is the stigma about ECT. So I think these three presentations would help at least doctors to present it earlier than the previously it was happening, and the cognitive deficits which are there, which causes worrying to the patient as well as the doctor. So when should it be preferred? So let's see that what are the predictors. So if these things are there in your patient, then you can be more confident to prescribe ECT. Like the duration of current episode is, the shorter it is, the better would be the response. In old people, it responds very well, and actually in other developing countries, since they give more in depression, there more than half of the population is actually elderly. And if the episode is moderate, severe to severely severe, the response will be better. If there is a medication failure, then go for ECT. Other things which are there proven better are suicidal risk and catatonic symptoms. Psychotic symptoms, there is not very consistent evidence, but if the patient has psychotic symptoms, most probably with depression, they are more likely to improve. The other indications can be that you want rapid improvement because patient doesn't have catatonia but not taking food. The patient is not able to tolerate the medication, adverse effects are there. There's a chance of drug interactions, or like in pregnancy or postpartum, the fetus or the baby would have issues. There are multiple comorbidities which may be in elderly or even in young patient also. So these are the other where you should go for ECT as early as possible for the treatment. Then there are some indicators which says that they are poor responsive. There's comorbid personality disorder, then the effect of ECT may not be that great. Comorbid OCD is there, then without OCD, what treatment you will, what improvement you would get, you may not get otherwise. But there are some things which are not the predictor, which may be, you may be thinking that they predict the improvement with ECT, like gender. Both men and women have similar response to ECT. Age at onset, whether it is old age onset, late age on, early age at onset, middle age onset, doesn't matter. If the depression is there, it would improve. Number of past episodes doesn't matter. If it was 1, 2, 4, 6, total duration of illness also doesn't matter. Though total duration of this episode matters. Bipolarity also, whether it's a unipolar or bipolar, it improves. Though in bipolar, there are some studies which says that the number of sessions required is less. Melancholic symptoms generally, they don't are the good predictors, or will say it will improve as it is. Then whether you're giving thrice or twice weekly ECT sessions, there's no that it would better response. Maybe the rate of response would be faster. We will talk a bit more about it when we'll speak about the electrode placement, that whether you should go for a thrice or twice. And Professor Jagdisha also has spoken about it, that when we should do. So I assume that by now, if these symptoms are there, the depression, you should go for a ECT. Couple of failures are there, age, old age, lot of comorbidities are there, psychotic symptoms are there, shorter duration of episode is there, and the psychotic symptoms, suicidal risk, then you should go ahead with ECT. Then what are the other predictors which have been seen but not been used, have not been prescribed in a guideline because there are not enough evidence? But if a person has a lower hippocampal volume, they is more likely to respond, and the greater amygdala volume, because these are the things which becomes better with the ECT. And if he has a greater if you have idea about the cingulate gyrus, then on the anterior side, if it's a subgenual part has a higher, greater volume, then it helps. The rostral anterior cingulate thickness, if it is reduced, and especially in the treatment-resistant depression, it has been seen that it works better. The other thing is, how is the connectivity between the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the posterior default mode network, which is more related to posterior cingulate cortex, inferior parietal lobule, and the posterior parietal lobule. So how this is connected to that? There are hypotheses about the depression also, that how this connectivity is not so well in the depression, which becomes better with the ECT. Then there are some evidence about that if there is a high level of CRP, 3 to 10, and the higher level of BDNF, probably that person would respond better to ECT. Some are poor response. If do you have a smaller gray matter volume in general, and then there is something called thalamus, which we will know more about in the mechanism of action. Thalamus play a better important role in depression, and this FALL-FF is actually an how much is the fraction of low frequency fluctuation is a thing which in general the other fluctuations are more related to the connectivity between the two parts, whereas this is more related to intrinsic connectivity. So if the person has already lower intrinsic connectivity in the left thalamus, probably this is not the ECT may not have such a good response for this depressive episode. Then the other thing which has been seen is that deep white matter hyperintensity, which is like related to the vascular etiology in around the basal ganglia or the Virchow Robin spaces, which may be more in late age onset depression or the vascular depression. So that also are the poor predictors. Then if already there is a medial temporal atrophy and left and right cingulate isthmus thickness asymmetry, but these are the things which if you don't remember, that's okay. These are more that probably in coming years when we have another Indians after some years back, we can say confidently that what are the neuroimaging related predictors. So now about schizophrenia. Although ECT started with schizophrenia, somewhere down the line it didn't have that position which was there earlier. And all guidelines have very much reserved opinion about ECT. ECT is not recommended here in the same way as in depression. The reason is that there are not enough RCTs. There are some open label trials, prospective studies, case control, retrospective, and some of them are also negative. So that is the reason that there are not good evidence-based trials which would say that ECT is good in schizophrenia. One of the reasons is that what you have chosen as an outcome. As far as real life outcomes are concerned, it definitely helps to reduce relapse. This is beyond doubt that it reduces the rates of hospitalization, it reduces the relapse of the symptoms. And then whichever studies have used with medications and medications alone, ECT is generally better. So definitely it cannot be placed vis-a-vis medication, but maybe the combination would be good. There are a lot of patients in maintenance ECT who has schizophrenia, and it helps in preventing relapse. Now, so what can be the possible indications? One is the treatment resistance, and ECT plus clozapine has a better response than with ECT and other antipsychotics. So probably clozapine should be tried, but if it's not tolerating, then you can definitely go for ECT. Sometimes it can be also used for treatment resistance, especially if a patient has catatonic features, there is aggression or agitation, you need a rapid improvement, or there is intolerance to the medications, then ECT can be a good augmenting agent in schizophrenia. Then what are the predictors for ECT? If a patient is young, here not the elderly, then he will respond better. There is a lesser family history of schizophrenia, the shorter duration as you have seen earlier, and also the total illness matters here. And if there is higher rate of admission, then the ECT is definitely going to bring down the admission rates. More paranoid kind of, rather than the other where there is more negative symptoms, then you should not expect that response with schizophrenia. And if the overall global assessment of functioning is better, then there is more chance that ECT would have benefit in that patient. So there are some differences as far as depression and schizophrenia is concerned. Here, negative symptoms, functioning, total duration of illness, these are definitely the important stuff which doesn't matter in patient with depression. Then what about mania and mixed episodes? Generally, outside the Asian countries, ECT is not preferred, but we have research which indicates that it has been used extensively. Almost 20 to 30% of the patients who receive ECT may have a mania or mixed episodes. And though there is always a risk also that if you give in bipolar depression, patient may switch to mania due to ECT. There is also an issue because you have to be cautious if you are giving mood stabilizer, which may be required. If the anticonvulsants are there, then need to be cognizant about the seizure threshold that it would be raised. If lithium is there, there is a risk of post-ECT confusion and delirium, and so you should be watchful. Again, here it is more used as a treatment augmentation when the catatonia is there or the aggression is there. So one of the things about ECT is also that ECT definitely targets symptoms. Aggression, catatonia, suicidal risk. These are the things where ECT works better than the medications and the time which it will take. Then you would be surprised, but there are a lot of case reports in eating disorders also that ECT has been helpful. In OCD also, there was a recent systematic review where 69 case report and case series were there, where almost 70% of cases have at least 50% of response. And they have advocated that we should go for an RCT or open label to see are we missing an important treatment in OCD. In PTSD also, there are open label trials with or without comorbid depression when both treatment and psychotherapy have failed. And the range is wide. Some studies have 90%, some has 30% up to improvement. And here also maybe RCTs can be planned. Then there are studies only on catatonia. It is related to what doesn't matter. And there are responses up to 100%. Though there is in last year, there was a review came about catatonia that it's not effective, but that study had a lot of issues the way it has taken the inference about the catatonia. And after that, there is another review came to comment on that. And probably in catatonia, all the psychiatrists would go for ECT, and that is a good choice. Sometimes ECT is also given for periodic catatonia where you are not able to find the cause as a maintenance ECT. And it can also be used in neuroleptic syndrome and its spectrum malignant catatonia. So sometime you would like to have in NMS, as Dr. Jagdisha also would have said, that we would avoid using succinylcholine in neuroleptic malignant syndrome because of hyperkalemia kind of picture. As I said, aggression is one of the indication, and so it has been used in dementia. Most of them are case reports and retrospective chart reviews, though there was one prospective cohort study, one case control, no RCTs, and response have been seen in more than 75% of cases. And when medications are not working, because patients with dementia can have sometimes behavioral activation due to antipsychotics, due to benzodiazepines, and it takes time to figure it out. So maybe ECT is a good alternative. Within a few sessions, the things would come down and then the medications may take over. There are very few patients where it has been used as a maintenance ECT in dementia also. Like in severe dementia, the refractory agitation and other BPSD can cause difficulty to handle them, and ECTs are used. There are adverse effects. The chance of post-ictal confusion or headache is more in patients with dementia, but the studies have not shown that the severity of dementia would increase due to ECT. So that I think is a very good news, so that you can give, because that is the one thing which patients also would be worrying, and the doctors themselves. Probably we do some good RCTs and more prospective ECT studies. ECT can be used with more confidence in these other disorders. The other last is the Parkinson. So it's not that only the depression improves if a patient has comorbid depression in Parkinson. There have been seen that there is simultaneously improvement in the motor symptoms, all kinds of, whether it is a rigidity, tremors, bradykinesia. Even the drug-induced dyskinesia has become better with ECTs. A person who has dyskinesia, old people with depression, not related to Parkinson, also they become better. There are open label studies, but this is generally not used only for Parkinson, though there are case reports, because the effect would go off after ECTs are stopped within few weeks. So now let's move about the other aspects of the ECT which you would like to decide, even if you have planned that, okay, I will give for this patient who has depression. So as you all must be knowing by the earlier presentations that there are three kinds of electrode placement which are used: bitemporal, right unilateral, and bifrontal. So if we see bitemporal and right unilateral, probably the bitemporal have more efficacy and more patients who responds than right unilateral. But in some studies, both have equal efficacy as well. But as far as cognitive deficits are concerned, generally right unilateral outperforms than the bitemporal. Now, how these are placed compared to bifrontal? Again, here many studies and authors feel that in terms of it is like a mid between bitemporal and right unilateral. Efficacy closer to bitemporal and cognitive deficits closer to RUL. But I would like to make it very clear that these things are not the as clear or as established as that ECT should be used in depression. So there are still needs of the studies which would have a bigger number of patients with using all of them and try to see both of them efficacy as well as adverse effects and give us the better picture. So if you have a patient whom you are concerned about speed of treatment, then go for bifrontal or bitemporal, because RUL will take some time. The first session definitely would not be useful. But if your concern is cognitive deficits, then maybe you should go for right unilateral. In mania, generally efficacy are similar with all three of them, but cognitive deficits are better in right unilateral and bifrontal. In schizophrenia, the studies have mostly RUL have not been well studied, and bifrontal have seemed to have a better tolerance and almost equal efficacy with bitemporal. So in schizophrenia, probably the bifrontal should be used unless and until people are not responding to bifrontal as well. So you have to decide your priority is what: faster improvement or avoidance of cognitive adverse effect. Based on that, you can take a call that which electrode placement should be used. But it should not be that whatever patients come, I will always use bitemporal or right unilateral and or bifrontal. And I'm very sure you all would be knowing that right unilateral would be only effective it is used 4 to 6 times seizure threshold. So that's a very important thing. And bitemporal and bifrontal 1.5 to 2.5 times. So if we don't do this, then we are wasting the sessions and having an opinion that the electrode placement was not good. Now, pulse width. I assume that you have an idea about pulse width, which is based on the way each neuron have its electrophysiological activity. Since it is less than 0.3 seconds, there was a thinking that we should have some more than brief, ultra brief. Brief ECTs are generally well established, that they are reasonable. There is no need to go beyond 1.5 milliseconds. So 0.5 to 1.5 if you are using it is brief ECTs that's mainly used across the nations. But gradually ultra brief is picking up, especially if you're using right unilateral, because for ultra brief, the best evidence is RUL with depression, where it could have the good efficacy, good speed of response, and lesser cognitive deficits. Though in that also there are studies which have contrary results. As far as bifrontal is concerned, there are fewer studies, but no additional benefits were found. So if people who are using only bifrontal, they are not generally preferring ultra brief, they would prefer brief ECTs. There are also literature published for use of ultra brief in neuroleptic malignant syndrome, depression, in Parkinson's disease. So again, there is no clear-cut guidelines also that you should use brief, but nowadays many guidelines are going towards that if you are using RUL, maybe you can use ultra brief. Now the pulse frequency. This is a recent thing which people thought that this parameter also we should modulate and see whether we can reduce cognitive deficits without compromising on the efficacy. As you must be knowing that pulse frequencies in 1 minute, how many cycles of currents you give. And if you have more number of cycles, then in 1 second you give more amount of current. If you have less number of cycles, then you can give less amount of current. So what happens is that the ECT machines are of two different kinds. One ECT machine is there where generally pulse frequency is kept constant and all the current strengths are given on that pulse frequency. So what happens if your current strength increases, your time also increases. But there is another kind of a machine where initially there would be the smaller pulse frequency, and as the amount of current increases, the pulse frequency comes down, so that the time duration, train duration would not exceed too much. Otherwise, like it can go 5 times, 10 times, and to give current for such a long time to the patient will cause physiological issues on heart, mainly in terms of asystole, bradycardia, or any bradyarrhythmias. So there are two kinds of things which are used. So by doing this, people realized also that if you have a lower frequency, the amount of current which is required is less. That is the reason why people started using reducing the pulse frequency to reduce seizure threshold. If seizure threshold is very high, then giving 1.5 or 2.5 times or 4 to 6 times becomes difficult. That is the time when people started seeing 50 pps versus 125 and 200, and they found that yeah, definitely it is a consistent that seizure threshold would be less. Then the second phase was when they is used in depression, and they found that we use 50 or 200, clinical outcome is same. The cognitive deficits was not studied well in that study. Recently, another study is there which has used in ultra brief, where 80 pps was compared with 200, and they found that although cognitive outcomes was not different, there is the rate of response was better in 80 pps. So probably we were expecting that since less charge is required, the cognitive outcome should be better, but that was not the case which has been found in these two studies. There is still a long way to go to explore the use or utility of pulse frequency, and it has not been done in schizophrenia. So that is the other thing which can be should be planned in future studies. Now, pulse amplitude, this is most recent and only one group of people who are working on pulse amplitude. In all ECT machines, it is kept as a 800 to 900 milliampere. So this amount of millicoulombs per second would be delivered if you are giving continuously current. So what has been seen that if the pulse amplitude is less, then the effect of current does not go outside, and so there would be lesser amount of unnecessarily stimulation which happens in temporal lobe or hippocampus, causing cognitive deficits. Based on that theory, it has been started, which is called ILAST, individualized low amplitude seizure therapy. They titrate the pulse amplitude to see which minimum amplitude should be given to induce seizure. and not to give unnecessarily higher amount of current per second. So whether you see pulse width, pulse frequency, or the pulse amplitude, mainly the final focus is to give less amount of current in 1 second. And so here that group first did was that try to figure out whether it is possible to give or not. They could figure it out that you can get about up to 500 milliampere, you are able to get the seizures. So that was a feasibility things. And then it was used in next studies where they give the whole session 6 times suprathreshold stimuli and found improvement. Recently they have done randomized 7 patients, 3 and 4, and in RUL, and after session 4 they see how much is the suicidal risk remaining. There they felt that it remitted faster in 500 milliampere. They didn't talk more about cognitive adverse. So again, this is a thing which we should see and assume, hope that in next 5 to 10 years it would be clearer in these electrical aspects as far as their particular specific indications are concerned. So now we'll go about another very enigmatic aspect of ECT. Though it is 85 years old, still we are very much puzzled how does it work. We have got, our idea has improved, but still you would realize by the end of the presentation that there is a long way to go. So before I give you the impression, I would have to have some disclaimers. One is that it's based on also animal and human based studies. Considering the paucity of time, I have not gone in much detail which is animal or human. There are studies which have results in disagreement to the hypothesis which I am going to present. There is concurrence between the various modes of investigations for that particular hypothesis, but still to a limited extent. Mostly investigations are done for depressive episodes. So their application to the following aspects is partial or we don't know, like schizophrenia, schizoaffective dementia. If we talk about specific subgroups, unipolar versus bipolar, how does it work, with or without psychotic symptoms. In treatment resistance, we have lesser idea. Specific symptoms, suicide, catatonia, aggression, we don't know. And about the adverse effects, though we are better than the other things, but still. And then how is the bifrontal work? Does the bifrontal work differently than the right unilateral? We have some idea again, but not that great. So after this, I'll give you a very bird's eye view about the mechanisms of action so that you get more confidence that there is something which ECT is doing biologically to help the patients. So the most important thing which has come, and at least we know that ECT definitely influences neuroplasticity. And there are many things to suggest that. If we saw about animal studies, if they have ECT, which is the electroconvulsive shock in animals, have shown neurogenesis in dentate gyrus subgranular zone and cornu-ammonis 1 in hippocampus. There are BDNF concentration more in these areas, more in dentate gyrus than other hippocampal areas than the whole cortex. There are evidence of gliogenesis. There are evidence of angiogenesis by these factors. This goes beyond hippocampus areas in prefrontal cortex, in amygdala, in hypothalamus and entorhinal cortex. And the stress-induced neuronal depletion which happens due to glucocorticoid, that comes down. There have been also seen that the early growth response gene, EGR3, its expression becomes more in the animals who receives ECS, electroconvulsive shock. So definitely ECT is affecting neuroplasticity, and that is one of the reasons probably that all psychiatric disorders, all the other disorders improve. In human studies, there have been studies on serum plasma of BDNF, and there are systematic review meta-analysis showing that plasma BDNF increases in ECT patients, especially responders with or without treatment resistance, though there are contradictory results. there are specific genetic polymorphism which has been shown that they are more correlated with good clinical response. So one of the issues with all these things are that the BDNF may get affected by a lot other things, and it is just the associated marker and may not be the only marker which the ECT is affecting. That may be one of the reasons that we are getting results on either side. In CSF also, it has been shown that the neurodegeneration markers which are for Alzheimer's, the tau proteins, beta amyloids and neurogranin, they gets reduced and with ECT, and it correlates with the reduction of depressive symptoms. So probably with stress, this neurodegeneration happens more, and ECT might be working on reducing them. Then in human studies, more are in terms of neuroimaging. First is the structural neuroimaging. Recently, one article which has taken all the studies who have done on cortical thickness and gray matter volume, and they have shown very clearly that there is definitely increase in the cortical thickness and gray matter volume in patients receiving ECT. It is both cortical and subcortical region. The results are more consistent with hippocampus and amygdala, where amygdala is reduced, probably because the stress and depression affects these two areas. Other areas where gray matter volume have increased are insula, subgenual anterior cingulate cortex, temporal pole and prefrontal cortex. If you remember, we have spoken about these things as a predictors for response to ECT. So you can see there is some correlation. Then there are treatment resistant depression. Specifically, this population was studied where the age of the population were middle age and the older age adults. There again the volume increases was in hippocampus, also in amygdala, putamen and superior temporal gyrus. What is seen is actually is that this increase in volume is more related to increase in number of sessions rather than the response. So whether it is an add-on effect happening with ECT or it's the one of the main effects by which the depression or the other symptoms improve, we don't have much idea. And the other thing which was there is that in bitemporal, compared to right unilateral, the left hemisphere gray matter volume increases more. Whereas in RUL, there is a difference between the left hemisphere and right hemisphere gray matter volume. Whereas in bitemporal, it is equal in both sides. So definitely it is related to effect of ECT, but how these things are related to clinical improvement, we are not very sure. Then there are studies which have the other kinds of neuroimaging like MRS, magnetic resonance spectroscopy, SPECT and PET. And they have shown is that there is a reduction in N-acetyl aspartate in the areas. Now this Na is related to the immature neurons. So we assume that the mature neurons increases and so the functioning of that area should improve. That is the underlying thing. Or it is that because immature neurons are less, so neurons are not proliferating, so it's causing cognitive deficits. We don't know. Then with PET and SPECT, there have been shown that there is increase in blood flow, there is increase in glucose uptake, there the white matter integrity with DTI is better. And these are the, is seen in thalamus and the contralateral sensory motor cortex rather than in the prefrontal cortex. And this may be because of, we know that generalization of seizures are important, and that's why these were done in bitemporal patients. So there's some, again, correlation with the effect of ECT. The cerebral blood flow is shown to be reduced in the lateral parietal cortex and inferior frontal cortex, which are more part of the default mode network. Non-responders have been seen to have increased cerebral blood flow in hippocampus and reduction in posterior cingulate cortex, which actually correlates better with more number of sessions because they receive more number of sessions. There the correlation was better than the non-responders. Then the fMRI, I'm not going in too much of detail, but as we have seen the predictors, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is not working as it should work. So its connectivity improves with the anterior cingulate cortex, with posterior cingulate cortex, with medial prefrontal cortex, which are parts of default mode network. Then also the amygdala and ACC have good improvement with connectivity with thalamus, which is said that maybe thalamus is able to better control these areas. Actually hippocampal network connectivity decreases. So that's a very interesting finding. Though the size, volume, thickness increases, the BDNF increases, in terms of neuronal connectivity, hippocampal reduces. So probably that is related to the cognitive deficits, we don't know. Though its connectivity improves with insula and middle temporal lobe. Again, the insular region, which is related to the salience network, to see which is good and which we should pay attention to. We know that in depression we end up paying attention to the negative aspects more. So its connectivity improves with caudate, angular gyrus and DLPFC. Again, here the issues are that some of these results have been shown with antidepressants, in other depressive disorders also, and plus some positive, some negative. But probably we have moved to some extent, saying that as far as volume neurogenesis is concerned, hippocampus is in the forefront. As far as the functional connectivity is concerned, probably DLPFC and ACC are in the forefront. So there are probably the brain works differently and much more complex manner than we know till now. So the hypothesis mechanisms in EEG. EEG has placed more importance to the thalamocortical inhibitory loop. So it has been hypothesized that probably with ECT there is a resetting, as we do in our computer reset or in a phone. So something of that sort probably in a much more complex manner happens, which helps to take care of depression. And the aberrant functional neural connectivity, which is there in frontal and limbic regions, that get modified. And out of these inhibitory increases, so that's why we see a lot of post-ictal suppression in EEG, seizure threshold increases, and there's a diffuse slowing which is there even though on non-ECT day. It also been shown as a other dimensions of EEG like fractal dimension, spectral power, and the delta coherence. So if you talk about now, there is an advancement in the EEG. Now it's possible to have along with temporal inference, the regional inference also. And what has been seen that the alpha beta becomes less and the theta and gamma oscillation, the theta oscillations increases. It increases in ACC and medial frontal cortex, and there the synchronization of theta phase also increases between the posterior cingulate cortex and anterior prefrontal cortex. So overall, again, it points about the hypothesis which was shown in the last slides, that the cortical inhibitory loop takes a lead role by strengthening the theta aspects rather than the beta and gamma phase synchronization and oscillations. And these things have been hypothesized that there is a phase reorganization within default mode network in the rest when the mind is still working a lot. And then its association with other networks like executive networks or frontoparietal and parieto-temporal networks. But sadly, these things are not so good related with whole clinical scores, and they are still at the hypothesis level. But assuming that the EEG analysis is becoming better and better with the advancement in general larger data analysis, probably we would be able to get better idea of electrical activities both in temporal and spatial manner. So what about neurotransmitters? We are using antidepressants which work on serotonergic and norepinephrine. So here also there are some things to suggest that ECT affects the same way as the antidepressants, that in long term it reduces the serotonin 2A and 1A receptors, but increase the 5-HT transporter. So that may be contributing to neurogenesis in hippocampus, that's been being said. The dopaminergic, they affect both D2 and D3 receptors, but as I'll tell in the psychosis, that they probably affect differently. What they affect nigrostriatal system and ventral tegmental area and the prefrontal cortex. There are also studies which have looked into the polymorphisms, and they have shown that based on different polymorphism for these receptors, which genes for these receptors, there are differential effect of ECT. There are differential effect of adverse effects by ECT. So definitely ECT is influencing these things, but we don't know exactly how. Then this is a very important thing which has come in last couple of years. This is a kynurenine pathway, which is that we only talk about serotonin, how tryptophan goes into serotonin, but tryptophan has another pathway which actually is the most important pathway if you leave serotonin. And it through kynurenine, it goes into, it can gets converted into NAD and also NMDA agonist. So if you talk about NAD, it may be more in terms of neurogenesis and helping out. But if NMDA agonist, there is a chance of having glutamatergic excitotoxicity also. So the same pathway, so that somewhere explains her also that how, since ECT affects this pathway, probably that's the reason it has the benefits also and the adverse effects what we see in the memory and other cognitive functions. So there have been studies, couple of studies both in CSF and blood, where they have shown that there is an increase in kynurenine metabolites and it correlates with mood improvement. One of these studies have done have tried to classify them in different subgroups. What is the baseline, whether it improves or doesn't improve or remains the same. So what has been seen is that there is a one group which always remain the constant. It doesn't have such a lower kynurenic metabolites. This is the group where the response was about 50%. But the other group, where one which is low, which improves better than what it was previously, and another group which was high but it goes further high. These two groups where the kynurenic metabolites increases after ECT, they have more, up to 75-90% of response. So there is more likelihood that ECT is definitely affecting the kynurenine pathway. Then early studies have also focused in GABA levels, that it changes in the brain in the animal studies, but recently there are not studies which have worked into this. Then there is a also report which have spoken about normalizing the glutamate excitotoxicity which happens, the glutamate normalization is done by the ECT, which may be related to the cognitive adverse effects. There is also decrease in monoamine oxidase A distribution volume in treatment-resistant depression after ECT, which have been shown to improve with clinical scores, reduction in clinical scores. But there is only one study, so we don't know whether we need some replication about that. Neuroinflammatory. Again, the neuroinflammation, neurodegeneration and neuroplasticity, we have studied now neuroinflammation. So there are a lot of studies which have been done which shows that these neuroinflammatory markers, first they will have in first phase, they will increase after first ECT, but later on they reduces. So probably there is some inflammation before depression, as the hypothesis have been put about depression, and ECT reduces them. But the problem in reporting them is much more difficult than the BDNF or other neurotropic factors. The reason is that any other infection you have, these inflammatory markers will increase in the blood. So the reliability is more with the CSF than blood. And that has been seen by a recent study which has looked into innate human response by looking into these CSF levels. And what they found was very interesting, that it correlated a lot positively with the reduction of depressive symptoms than what the blood levels would correlate. And there was also a correlation between the way these immune system things work and the neurodegeneration. They also correlated with each other. So probably the immunoinflammatory system, neuroplasticity, reduction of neurodegeneration, everything are happening to contribute to the effect of ECT. As we know that when seizures happen, there is an increase in prolactin, there is increase in oxytocin, vasopressin, but there are intrinsic difficulties in measuring these hormones. So So their response relation with the clinical response to ECT is not very clear. Although in schizophrenia, people are more interested in oxytocin because oxytocin is also related to social cognition, and to see that how does it affect ECT. Then the one thing which has been shown is that there is a normalization of that hyperactive hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and so the serum cortisol become better, the exaggerated response to dexamethasone CRS test becomes better with ECT. So in general, the response stress response becomes less with ECT. Now this is another new field which is coming up, epigenetic mechanism. So now we know that genes are not enough to decide our phenotypes or our actions, how it interacts with the environment. So these have been used in ECT also, and there are very good consistent positive results. Because the epigenetic decides that how there would be transcriptional and post-transcriptional modifications, and ECT definitely affects them, including acetylation, histone-related deacetylation, methylation, and microRNAs, which are those silent RNAs which come here and there to decide whether the RNA will give rise to what kind of proteins. And these kinds of epigenetic processes have been seen in BDNF, fibroblast growth factor, vascular endocrine growth factors, CREB, which is very important thing which relate to increase amount of protein expression, the ARC protein, which is very important for the neuronal synaptic activity, then the GAD45B, which reduces the growth of the neurons. So all these effects on epigenetic effects on this have been seen by ECT, but these are mainly explored in hippocampus, so maybe gradually, and these are more of them are the animal studies, so we need to go further and try to see how it is related to humans and other parts of the brain. So what happens in psychosis? As I said, psychosis probably there is this frontal thalamus and limbic network. It affects through neurogenesis and neuroprotection. Again there is a prominence of theta waves and reduction in index of alpha waves, more stronger in frontal regions than in the temporal regions. There is increase in serum BDNF and VEGF have been found as was seen in depression. There are also one important interesting study came which shows that with antipsychotics alone there was not that much increased in global neuronal connectivity and between medial prefrontal cortex and left precuneus as it was with ECT plus antipsychotics. So definitely ECT adds to the antipsychotic effect which we have seen in the clinical studies. Here also what happens is that in depression, if you see, there was a reduction, there was increase of NNA. Here it happens difference. Here the NNA is reduced, which gets reversed with ECT. So that again is very different kind of effect which is there compared to what was in depression. And this is seen in left prefrontal cortex and thalamus. So here the immature neurons are much more than what you see in depression. The other thing which is there that there is a there are different kinds of findings related to resting state network. So the activation within DMN comes down, it reduces. Then there is improved regulation between executive network and salience network, and we know these are related to cognitive functions which are reduced in patients with schizophrenia. So possibly the brain networks gets better organized and regularized with ECT. And the dopaminergic receptors which we have spoken, it works differently. The clinical way of seeing it is with it helps in psychosis as well as in extrapyramidal symptoms. And also it has been seen with the animal studies that though it increases the amphetamine related locomotion and grooming in rats, but it also reduces the addiction behavior related to amphetamine. So it also works in the core part of the amphetamine, but with related to ventral tegmental and frontal area, if amphetamine has to act, it works differently. So right now we can say that with the help of epigenetic with the change in neuroimaging, with improvement in EEG facilities, we are going to get better understanding. And many of these things which I have told are the recent advancement. I have not spoken about the things which were there, except that there was some idea that there is post-ictal suppression and some increase in volume. But getting a better confidence about that, getting idea about the other resting state networks, all these things have happened in last 10-15 years. So we should be hopeful that with advancement in neuroimaging, EEG, the large data analysis, epigenetic and other mechanisms, we should be able to decipher better about the ECT. And probably the stigma related to ECT would come down further. But what happened to cognitive deficit? This is my last part. So again, this is not very sure what happens. The hypotheses are there. It breaches the blood-brain barrier, so it leads to hyperperfusion. There are leak of major proteins and macromolecules into CSF and interstitial spaces, which affects the functioning of the specific cortical areas. And as we said, that there is a decrease in beta phase synchronization. These were related to change in MMSE scores. Again, MMSE is not the best one to decide about ECT related cognitive deficits, but there were, so the decrease in that post-ictal suppression, if it's happening in these areas, PCC and left insula, which works with the attention and salience network, probably we are having the cognitive deficits. And it also has a decrease in left temporal lobe, lateral temporal, not the medial one where the hippocampus is there, but they were negatively correlated with change in MMSE. Then also this glutamatergic toxicity, which is there due to kynurenine pathway, hyperactivity of NMDA receptors, increase in COX-2 enzyme and kynurenic acid, which may lead to the failure of long-term potentiation. There is also a decrease in cerebral blood flow in prefrontal cortex patients who have more retrograde amnesia, and who have anterograde amnesia, they have more reduction in the temporal regions and the right frontal pole. Again, the hippocampal volume change, if there is a more hippocampal volume change, it correlates with negative cognitive functions. But again, these may be because these patients are getting more number of ECTs. So we don't know exactly that we can directly say that the increase in volume is causing cognitive deficits. In terms of epigenetic mechanisms, the histone deacetylation in hippocampus is more related to cognitive deficits in animals. Then there are interaction. Recent study has shown that the carriers who with both DRD2, TT and BDNF valine allele, they have lesser anterograde memory deficits than the others. So there are something which prevents the ECT related adverse deficits of BDNF as well. So probably I would end here, and I know that I have just moved ahead. But I think after this you would have some confidence that we are dealing with a treatment which is really affecting the brain, and we know something, so we should use ECT, and the areas where we should ECT, I have tried to give the picture. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now the floor is open for discussion. If anybody wants to ask a query, you can use the chat option, or you can raise the hand in the chat option, or you can ask it here and we'll try to answer it. We'll unmute your mic and you can then ask the question. Does anybody have any queries regarding today's topic? Dr. Mini, can you unmute your mic and ask the question?
Good afternoon, ma'am. My questions are, first is like in ECT, in negative symptoms of schizophrenia, what is the evidence base for the response for negative symptoms? And my second question is regarding ECT in OCD? Is it just for the OC symptoms, or it is considered in OCD with severity and suicidal risk?
Okay, so in terms of your first questions, if a person has a negative symptoms, actually it is taken as a poor response to ECT. So ECT, although there are not studies done specific for negative symptoms, but in general, those patients who had ECT in patients with schizophrenia, there the negative symptoms was not the things which have improved. If they have, sometimes also it happens that which we think as a negative symptoms, it is as a depression. So there is not clear-cut evidence about that ECT helps in negative symptoms. But in general, overall, patients would improve in terms of his psychotic symptoms and functioning. That's what happens with ECT in treatment-resistant schizophrenia. As far as OCD is concerned, there are all the three kinds of patients have been seen. So it's not only that patient with depression will improve or patient with suicide will improve. What they have seen that it's not only with suicidal risk improves, the OC symptoms also improve with when the ECT is given. Though there are negative, and these are all case and case series. So there is definitely a need of having at least some prospective better trials to see whether how much and which kind of OC symptoms it improves.
Dr. Praveen Kumar, can you unmute your mic and ask the questions? Dr. Praveen? The questions asked by Dr. Praveen are role of ECT in delirium and how to calculate seizure threshold.
So seizure threshold, I think to some extent it was focused in the first class. There are a lot of ways to do it. One is titration based. Generally what is done is that if your age is less than, the patient's age is less than 45, or patient age is more than 45, or he is on valproate or any other anticonvulsants, then it's better to start with 120. Otherwise, less than 60, 80 on these kind of millicoulomb should be okay. If patient has couple of these things, it can be started at 180 or 140, 180 or more than that. Other is the age related, where there are seizure threshold determined based on the age, your nasion-inion distance, and but all the these formulas have been sometimes criticized because this leads to sometimes overstimulus and understimulus. And in ECT, this is an idea that if you give extra things, it will more relate to cognitive adversity. There is another one which says that you just give the highest what you can give, so that you don't waste your time in determining the seizure threshold. And in NIMHANS, we used titration-based seizure threshold. Then what about the delirium? ECT in delirium is more like used for aggression, and generally it's best to find the cause of delirium, because that would be very much important, because if it's some medical comorbidities are there, it will affect its the effect of the anesthetic medication and the muscle relaxants. But if all these things have been ruled out, there are cases, there are a couple of studies which have focused on delirium, but most of these studies have taken delirium with dementia. So it can be used, but generally people work on finding out the cause rather than taking it. So it's a symptom-based treatment, not the cause of the delirium.
Dr. Sachin, can you unmute your mic and ask the question?
Hello.
Yeah, please.
Good evening, ma'am. This is Dr. Sachin. I'm a junior resident from CIP Ranchi.
Okay.
I wanted to ask, is there any evidence for modifications in pulse width to reduce the cognitive side effects? This is one. And the second one is, what is the current consensus about the ECT in NMS patients? Is it used currently? And if it is used, is there any mechanism of action that has been theorized or explained?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so coming to your first question, pulse width. So the ultra brief, which is less than 0.5 milliseconds, has been investigated mainly for the reason of cognitive adverse effects. So especially if you have a patient with depression and you are worrying about cognitive adverse effects, maybe the ultra brief RUL would be uh, the ECT which you should go, but there you have to give, if you are giving ultra brief RUL, you should give 6 to 8 times, not 4 to 6 times. So at least 6 times you should give seizure threshold the ET. So there are not there is one RCT, but there are a lot of case series where they have showed that definitely they have lesser cognitive adverse effects. But guidelines, they don't say anything that you should use this. So this level of evidence is not available to say that okay, if you have cognitive adverse effects, you use ultra brief RUL, nothing of that sort. But this can be one of the options as ultra brief RUL. In bifrontal, it has not been shown to have so much of reduction in adverse effects, cognitive adverse effects. Now, role of ECT in NMS. Generally, what happens is that nowadays you may not get very frank NMS, and the NMS generally happens in individuals with psychotic symptoms who are dehydrated and have been given a lot of injectable first generation antipsychotics. So there the only reason is not the NMS, but also that I need to, because NMS makes the person a bit confusional, delirious, he becomes more aggressive, you can't give antipsychotics, but it has caused problem. So in that way, overall ECT should be tried, but make sure that you have an idea of how much is the CPK level, how much is his renal function test, and hydration should be proper. We do use here a lot in that way, but there's no specific guidelines. In guidelines, it is said that you can use ECT, but see how much is the CPK, and you can try with succinylcholine if you have a ventilators and everything available, or otherwise you should give etracurium. The problem with etracurium would be that it will take a longer time to come back. So one patient may take 30 to 45 minutes. But if you have a doubt, then you go for etracurium. And we do use, because we get a patients who have been come from outside, have been given series of injectables, and he's so delirious, we can't do anything. We need to get away from NMS and also his psychotic or mood symptoms. Now, in terms of mechanism of action, it has not been explored specifically for NMS. So at least I am not aware of. So I don't have idea about it.
Dr. Gyan Nihal, can you please unmute your mic and ask the question? The role of ECT in simple schizophrenia.
Again, as Dr. Mini Sharma was asking in terms of negative symptoms, and nowadays, since gradually we are moving away from this, ECT has not been said very specifically that you should be used in simple schizophrenia. So if paranoid schizophrenia is there, it will be a better response. So maybe a poorer response than what it would be in paranoid schizophrenia.
Dr. Mini Sharma has asked the question again. Are the epigenetic changes in schizophrenia and related to ECT changes related like DRD2 and BDNF changes?
So epigenetic changes have been mainly seen with related to depression. And there was one which have been seen with related to DRD2, but most of them have been done in depression. Because most of these studies have been done outside, and schizophrenia is not their first priority in ECT. So, but there are studies which are happening, and probably in some time we would be able, and it should have some epigenetic effects, but right now we are not very much aware of. Then,
when will we call a seizure adequate? Praveen has asked, for which I think Dr. Amritpal Singh has answered in the chat itself. You can go through that.
Yeah, so that has been told about, I think in that there is a cuff monitoring is tried, and it was told in the first session also by Professor Jagdisha. So I think if you can go through that presentation, it would be nice.
Dr. Sachin has asked again that what is the cutoff to say prolonged seizures in ECT and how to go about it?
So I think it would have been discussed in last when they have spoken about the thing. If it not, there is no exactly cutoff, but if it is more than 120 seconds, then definitely it's going to prolong and we need to abort it. But if by 60, 90 we start working and be ready that if it doesn't get abort by 120, to give benzodiazepine, lorazepam, midazolam, or to give propofol accordingly.
Dr. Akash from AIIMS has asked, in patients with dementia, will the cognitive adverse effects of ECT be a concern?
Yeah, so as I have told that there is more chance of post-ECT related delirium or confusion. So best would be to have, if you are giving thrice a week ECT, then maybe after a week you can make it twice a week. Generally, these patients respond within 6 sessions. But whatever happens with dementia, even if you are giving for dementia and depression, none of these studies have showed that the patient's adverse effects, cognitive deficits continued. So he would go into same cognitive state what he was before ECT. Whatever the level of dementia was there, it would be. So those things we need to tell to the family members, and then they should take a call that what has to be done. Generally, ECT is used as a last resort in dementia. So I think by that time, what our experience is there in old people which we are dealing with dementia, that including the doctors and the family members are so much distressed that none of the medications are working, that and because it happens more in a severe dementia, already a lot of cognitive decline is there. So in our experience, people are bothered, but they are not bothered the relatives, family members. And since they are in dementia, we are not able to take, they are not competent to give the consent.
Dr. Alok has asked, current evidence on threshold or supra-threshold current in efficacy of ECT.
So in 2019, there was one article came which says that why we are giving more than supra-threshold ECT, it's not required. I'm not remembering exactly what it was, but probably that that article has looked into things in a one-phases manner, and so it is said that at least 1.5 to 2 times should be given. And till now, guidelines are saying, so there has not been revised as far as guidelines are concerned, but people have raised a query that why to give more than threshold. But here we give 1.5 times consistently, but we have seen that if by chance 3 times is given, patient have more cognitive adverse effects. And also we have seen that, especially we ask everyone that if improvement is not happening, see whether the threshold was up to threshold it was given. So then we have found that in many a times it was given threshold, or threshold was not determined, that is causing not having an adverse effect. As far as RUL is concerned, it has been shown quite clearly that 4 to 6 times if you are using brief, and if you are using ultra brief, 6 to 8 times should be given.
Dr. Ujjwal Khajanchi has raised a hand. Can you please unmute your mic and ask the question?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, ma'am. I am Dr. Ujjwal Khajanchi, junior resident. Ma'am, is there any evidence of ECT in impulsive compulsive disorder, like in internet addiction disorder, gambling disorder, and after all any substance use disorder? Is there any evidence of ECT?
No, there is not evidence about any of these things. And as far as there are, I think very few case reports are there. Not even you can be in a single digit probably. And so the other thing we need to remember that many of these patients may have underlying depression. If depression is there, whether you know or don't know, ECT knows. So if you give ECT in that, it will improve you, especially if it is more than mild and have these things. But as such, any guidelines don't recommend, and we also don't recommend that you use it as a first or second or third line of treatment also to work. But if you have additional things which where ECT, for example, the patient has suicide or patient has gone into catatonia, sometimes substance withdrawal leads to catatonia. So like especially the benzodiazepine or the zolpidem or these things. In that, if withdrawal symptoms are not been there, their ECT are considered.
Dr. Alok has asked ECT in delirium, which is already discussed in the current session. Probably when we upload this, Dr. Alok, you can see it in the YouTube. We'll not go through it again. If there are no more questions, that brings us to the end of today's session. And before we end in today's session, I would like to thank Linux Laboratories for their support through educational grant through which we are running this program.